So today we're going to make, or I guess really tonight, we're going to make Thit Kho. It's a kind of homemade stew that I grew up eating. It's normally made with kind of not such great pieces of pork because you cook it in sugar and all kinds of like sauces and sometimes even coconut water. I don't make a version with coconut water, some people do, but it's kind of a very traditional dish in any Vietnamese family's home. It's a very common thing to eat with rice and sometimes veggie on the side. I know for us, we just generally eat it with rice because it's really delicious and it doesn't eat anything else.
Woohoo!
Yay! So shall we go over the ingredients?
Please do.
So this is a relatively simple dish compared to most other things. It first requires a lot of garlic. I have 9 cloves right there. I specifically picked 9 because 9 felt like the right amount, and 10 is a bad luck number. So I didn't want 10 cloves. Outside of that, we have 6 eggs. So Thit Kho is normally served with its stewed meat and eggs, and hard-boiled eggs that are soaking in the stewed meat sauce. So we have 6 eggs here. Normally I pick the number of eggs based on how many eggs per person that you're going to serve. Here, Jean and I both really love the egg part of this dish, so we each get 3 eggs, and consequently there are 6. Outside of that, there's about 2 pounds of pork. This is specifically pork sirloin. You can kind of use other cuts of meat. Generally, it's a stew, so you want to be able to cut the pork into big chunks that will cook down, just like a beef stew. So you could use a loin. You could sometimes even use some of the pork chops that they'll thinly slice for a kind of different version of this, but I still generally prefer bigger chunks of pork in general. I think Jean does too.
Meh.
Outside of that, we have olive oil. This uses a tiny bit of soy sauce, not much, and then the magic component of this dish is fish sauce. I know it looks crazy, why are you serving fish sauce with pork? But fish sauce does a really great thing whenever you cook it down to pork because it really enhances the flavor. And then oyster sauce. I personally think that oyster sauce adds a little bit of sweetness to it, so I don't have to put coconut milk in this, or coconut water I should say. Some people put a tiny bit of coconut milk too, but I like oyster sauce because it adds sweetness and it also is a little bit salty, and also most of all it adds a nice like caramel color whenever it starts to coat and cook onto the meat. Outside of that, lots of pepper. That's one of the things that makes a really good Thit Kho, because otherwise it's just kind of this sweet meat dish. If you as you continually cook it, you add a little bit more black pepper so that it has this kind of extra layer of spice and heat on it, which is really great. And then lastly, just straight granulated sugar. In one of the final steps, which is probably the hardest part of this dish. I don't think this dish overall is very difficult as compared to some other dishes, but basically we're going to melt some sugar and then pour it into the stew and let the caramelized sugar cook into all of the stew. So I think at the next step, we're going to start cutting and slicing and dicing everything. Howdy! So we've cut everything up and we're getting ready to put everything into the pan now. So first I'm going to get some oil. And this is kind of a soup pot, and I am going to liberally coat the bottom of it because there's going to be meat, there's going to be garlic in here, there's going to be quite a bit, and you want to make sure that none of this sticks too tight to the pot.
What kind of flame do you have going right now?
I have a high flame. We're going to cook almost all of this on high flame.
All right.
Except for the final stewing process, which you will see soon.
What kind of prep stuff did you do in the interim?
Let's take a look. I have finally minced the garlic.
My God, that's fine.
And outside of that, I've cut the pork into kind of like 1 cubic inch squares. So enough to have one bite, but also just like a little big enough to where you have to like pull it apart with a fork. And then outside of that, Jean has ever so kindly put the 6 eggs to boil. It's been in there for about like 8 minutes now. Generally, I boil my eggs for about 10 minutes, and then after the 10-minute mark, I just turn off the fire and let the eggs sit until I'm ready to start peeling them, in which I'll put them in ice water so that I can get the shells a little looser and also rinse my hands as I peel the eggs too.
That's cool.
So think we are ready to cook. So after the oil has heated for probably about
2 or 3 minutes.
2 to 3 minutes, I'm gonna put all the garlic in. Here's the part, because the garlic is finely minced, you gotta, once you start, you gotta very quickly move. As you can see, it's starting to brown.
In true fashion, Lily, of course, never uses a spatula. She uses the sticks.
Yes. And you see some of that garlic's already starting to brown. So at this point in time, I'm going to go ahead and put in all this nice pork.
You actually find you get better control with the sticks, right?
Yeah, I like it because I have better control. As you can, now you can start to see all of that cooking up. And what I normally do before the next step is make sure that the edges get cooked a tiny bit. You're starting to see that rather than looking like raw flesh, it's starting to turn a little white. That's normally kind of my indicator that it's time for all of the sauces. So as I had mentioned previously, the first and most important thing is fish sauce. So I use the Three Crabs brand.
Oh.
It's my favorite brand, and I'm probably going to put about a tablespoon in here, which is probably as much fish sauce as you could ever put into anything.
Pretty powerful, isn't it?
It is. It is really, really strong, so you should be very careful with it when you use it. And I'm going to stir that up so that the fish sauce nicely kind of coats all this pork. You're going to kind of get as a warning, you'll get a little bit of a strong scent coming from the pan after you put the fish sauce in.
Oh,
you
yeah.
can definitely testify on this. It's not going to smell particularly pleasant, but I promise that that's normal, and eventually that smell goes away, and all you're left with is kind of the savoriness of the fish sauce that I discussed previously.
And I think that's important because the first time I smelled it, I thought it was off. To be really honest with you, and I can vouch on how delicious it makes things, but currently it has the smell of old gym socks.
Yeah.
And that's not exaggerating.
It's a little rough. And it is going to leave your house smelling maybe a tiny bit like fish sauce, but
That's okay.
The better part of fish sauce, not this kind of acrid smell that it starts off with. Hopefully I did not just scare you all off. I might have. So now that the fish sauce has coated everything, I'm going to start adding kind of the seasoning to get the beginning basic blocks of everything. So I'm going to grab my pepper, and grab my soy sauce. I'm going to grab one of my favorite ingredients, oyster sauce.
The woman is an octopus.
So I'm probably going to put a teaspoon of soy sauce in here. And that's going to give it just a little bit of saltiness and some color. And now I'm going to add a lot of pepper.
And when you say a lot, we're talking almost a tablespoon.
Probably a tablespoon and maybe even a tiny bit over a tablespoon.
It does add that dimension because you're right. Otherwise, without that little spike of pepper, it's just this very sweet meat dish, which I guess would be okay, but it's kind of a one-hit thing.
Exactly. It would definitely be a very one-dimensional dish without the pepper. Alright, and you're starting to see these nice bubbles at the bottom, kind of this sauce that's thickening, which is always a good indication that things are going well. And now for the part that really is the most important for color, it's definitely this oyster sauce. So I'm probably going to add about a tablespoon and a half, actually, because there's a lot of pork in here. You want the pork to have the nice brown color long before you put the sugar in. The sugar is going to add extra, but this is going to kind of add that first layer of caramelization, and then the sugar will add the final layer, kind of the finishing layer.
Now you're still on high heat, right?
Absolutely. And now you're going to stir everything up to let it all coat. And if you notice, the pieces of pork are pretty big. And one of the reasons is because this is a stew, I actually want to keep all of the liquid that's being formed at the bottom from the pork that's getting released, because that's going to add a really nice base to the final sauce. Alright, so it's been about 20 minutes and the pork has been cooking away, so let's take a look at how it's doing.
Ooh, smells beautiful.
Yes, it's cooking nicely. You see that the meat is starting to kind of get a little brown and take on the color of the sauce. The sauce is looking really good. I prefer a little bit of a looser sauce in general. That way the eggs can eventually soak it up. But sometimes it doesn't always have to be that way. You can put just a little less water in your base if you want kind of a sauce that will just coat the pork more. Again, I like to think of this more as a stew, so I try to leave a little bit of a looser sauce. And so I'm going to give that just a quick stir just to make sure all the surfaces are have gotten a chance to cook in the liquid. And I am going to just put a tiny bit more pepper, just for some good measure. Pepper. And the smallest drop of fish sauce. And when I mean drop, just a drop. Just add a little bit more. And give that a quick turn. And then we're going to get to probably the most exciting part of all of this, is the sugar melting portion. Yay! I think it's actually the most fun, but also kind of the trickiest. So I'm going to leave that. And remember, the flame is still kind of on a medium. And you could probably even turn it down a little bit, but I'm actually going to wait and turn it down after I put in the sugar, because we don't want the sugar to continue to crystallize into a solid form. So, how do we do this thing? First, you want to get a nice non-stick kind of saucepan. I think it's a fair, small saucepan. We use ours for eggs, and it's the perfect usage right now for sugar. What you're going to do is, so I have about 2 pounds of meat, so I'm going to actually cover the bottom with sugar entirely. That's probably a total of, it's fair to say, maybe 3.5 tablespoons.
I'd say about that much.
And I'm going to shake this to even it out a little bit across the pan as much as I can. And notice I haven't turned the flame on at all. That's because once the flame turns on, this melts really quickly and can get out of control really fast. So you want to make sure that everything's spread out nicely before you get started. So I'm just doing a little bit of finger spreading right now, because it's not always perfect. You just want to get it as even as possible so all the corners get an equal chance to melt off.
Right.
You notice I have my fingerprints in there, but those will all very quickly go away soon. So now I'm going to turn up the flame all the way up high. Right, and we're going to keep an eye on it. Do not leave the stove at this point in time. This is only a matter of maybe 20 to 30 seconds. First, what you're most likely going to see are the edges starting to melt, and then once you see the edges melting, what I normally do is I start to stir the melted edges into the non-melted edges until we get a consistent liquid, and then I will pour it straight into this bubbling pot of pork. Keeping an eye on this. Haven't noticed anything yet. Again, stay very focused on these edges. Do not go away. The moment that you think that you even have a minute, it's going to start to burn. See, on this corner right here, you're starting to see things getting a little bit solid. So that's a good sign that you're on the way. And it's probably going to be a matter of only 2 minutes before everything is melted. Again, make sure that your pan is a non-stick pan, because otherwise this is going to be a nightmare to clean.
So now the thing that blew a lot of people's minds the last time you made it was they assumed you put butter or something in here for the sugar to caramelize, but the only thing that's in that pan right now is sugar, correct?
Yeah, only sugar. Okay, so we see the melting happening right here. It's becoming clear liquid. Now we can start stirring it all together so that it'll solidly melt off. Keep in mind you want to move quickly because you do not want this to burn. And anytime you see these kind of loose areas, you want to introduce the non-melted sugar so that it doesn't burn. Again, all of this to keep in mind. It's just, you really don't want any burning on this. So now you've noticed I have a pretty, it's basically a sugar liquid. I'm going to shut the stove off as I finish melting off these tiny little bits. And now this is ready to go straight into the pan. So be very careful in this next process because there's going to be a lot of bubble back. And we're going to pour the sugar straight in. And what I normally do is, once I've gotten the most of it out of the pan, I take a piece of meat and I brush out all the excess sugar.
A pork sponge, one would say.
Yes, pork sponge / spatula. And you'll see that this sugar will stick a little bit and become a little granular.
That'll get every last bit of sugar out of the pan.
Exactly. And remember that even though you might see it solidify a tiny bit in the pan, and even on this chopstick, as you notice, it's going to melt off even more within the sauce that has already been made. And I will probably let this cook for another 10 minutes, and I'm going to see how it looks and tastes. And sometimes if the stew is overall, Thit Kho is still a little too salty, I will do another round of caramelization on it as well. So we'll keep an eye on it, see how this turned out. But I have a feeling that this first batch is probably going to be all we need. So I will show you in about 10 minutes what to do next. Right, so it's been another 10 minutes or so, and I've been letting the pork continue to cook. In the meantime, I have taken the eggs out of boiling water and I've put them in the ice. This is something that my family used to do just so that you could get the peel off the eggs a little bit easier, because once you put them in this stew, it doesn't really matter necessarily if the eggs are peeled badly, but we always found it kind of a little bit annoying and also a little sad when the eggs don't peel correctly and you get these bumpy eggs in the middle of this kind of really nice, pretty caramelized stew. So here's the meat. It's looking pretty good. So this next part is going to be kind of tricky because, again, it's really based off of your own judgment. So what I normally do is I taste the sauce, you know. I think about, pardon me, how sweet I want it. And currently the way that the sauce is cooking, based on what I've done so far, is that it's sweet at the front and then the sweetness kind of fades off into the savoriness coming from the fish sauce and the oyster sauce. I want this sweet to personally last a little longer, so this part you can actually just add a little bit more sugar, you know, maybe just a teaspoon more of sugar to the stew, and this will continue to give it a further richer brown color too, because that sugar is going to dissolve and also caramelize. So we will continue to cook this. I'm going to mix up and make sure that the sugar is evenly distributed within the stew. And I'm going to put the lid back on and I'm going to cook this probably for at least another 20 minutes. And in the meantime, while you're waiting for this, I know it seems like there's a lot of wait time. Next wait series, we're going to actually peel the eggs and get those ready to put inside of the stew. Alright, so the Thit Kho has been cooking for about 25 more minutes. Let's see how it's doing. And it's starting to look really good. That's the color that you want.
What's the consistency like right now?
The consistency is, the sauce has started to thicken up a little bit, but not much. That's how I generally like it. The more important part of all of this is making sure that the meat is starting to kind of take up all of that really pretty sauce, and so it's starting to kind of get a caramel color as well.
For the folks at home, what does it smell like to you?
To me, it smells like pepper, and I'm trying to think what else. It smells it has a very distinct smell of its own. That's normally actually the way that I know that it's ready, is that the stew, it kind of almost has, oddly enough, this sweet smell to it, and it has a savory smell, as I constantly discuss, coming from the fish sauce. It almost, oddly enough, has a little bit of this kind of coconut mixed with savory smell. The sweetness is coming from the sugar, and the nuttiness kind of coming from the meat and all the garlic. As you notice, you don't really even see a speck of garlic in any of this because it's all pretty much broken down. I don't know, what do you think, Jean? What does it smell like? I know that this is a little bit more of an abstract dish than...
Oh, for an Italian, yeah. I mean, you can smell the sweet off the top, but then it does have almost like a beef stew kind of hardiness to it. But definitely sweet is the overwhelming smell in the air right now, for me at least.
Yeah, and so as you notice, this sauce is getting thicker, and I don't really want it to get any thicker than this, so I'm going to turn down the heat pretty low for the next... I'll probably cook it for 20 more minutes. At this point in time, in reality, you could probably serve it. This is one of those dishes that really does get better with time. So the more time you are able to stew it, the tastier it will get. But the best part is now that we're going to add the eggs. So the eggs have been nicely peeled. They look pretty good. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to nest them in the sauce.
Because they really do soak up a lot of this very, very beautiful sauce.
They do.
My favorite parts of this dish. And we should also say too that while this is going on, we've cooked about maybe 2 cups of rice to go along with the dish. Which again isn't necessary, but especially with the egg, I find that breaking down the egg into the rice is kind of a groovy thing.
Yeah, my favorite thing to do is actually to open up one of the eggs and put the yolk into the actual rice and pour sauce all over it, and it kind of makes this this non-cooked fried rice with the extra delicious pork sauce on top. So I'm going to just continue and make sure that each egg kind of has a little nest within all the meat. I know that's insane sounding, but that looks pretty good. And what I will do most likely is we're going to return in about 15 minutes, but in between, probably I will just flip the eggs so that each side gets a chance to cook up in the sauce. So the eggs have been cooking for another 15-17 minutes or so, and we're ready to serve. So I've turned off the flame, and Jean has ever so kindly put a bed of brown rice down that we can put all of this meat and egg on. And traditionally this is served with jasmine rice. In the Fierro house, we eat a lot of brown rice, so this time we had brown rice on hand.
I like it, it tastes good.
And just going to put some meat on top. Make sure to get a little bit of the sauce as well. Part of the best part is having some sauce and some rice. Then of course, an egg. More chunks of meat.
Beautiful.
And maybe just one more chunk. And that is Thit Kho. Enjoy!